This is Michael Clara coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah. Today is September 17th, 2024, and this is update number 2 to the Spencer Cox signature list cover-up. I'm going to review where we're at with 2 issues that are in district court, 3rd district court here in the state of Utah. And this update is a follow-up to a video I posted about a month ago titled Spencer Cox Signature List Cover-Up. And I had did a fundraiser of $2,000, and I want to thank everyone who contributed. We were able to meet our goal. And what that covers is the filing fees for the 2 issues that I'll talk about here, the 2 cases that are in 3rd District Court, and I'll give an update on that. What I wanted to do first is just kind of give some context to those 2 cases. And one way I wanted to frame it is these are postings on X, and it kind of gives a good picture of where we're at with people, I would say, in the community or here in the state of Utah. Patriotic John, who wrote, Phil got the county clerks to admit Cox qualified on statistical likelihood of valid signatures, not 100% valid signatures. So I'll explain what he means by that as we go through this. And in contrast to what he posted, you have this other oppositional view that says, all we know so far is that the Davis County clerk certified 28K signatures for Cox, and that John Dougal did an audit that indicated there are likely 28K signatures for Cox. Haven't heard Lyman call either of them fraudsters or incompetent. And I'll go over with that, spending a significant amount of time on the results of that John Dougal audit that he mentions. But let's start real quick. This will be a quick timeline just to give you context on where we're at today. January 5th of this year is when we had candidates signing up to run for governor. Phil Lyman was amongst those. And as we all know, Governor Cox is the incumbent. Then you'll have to go look at some other videos I made, or hopefully you already know that there's 2 paths to being on the ballot. If you're a Republican here in the state of Utah, Governor Cox chose to take the signature path. And on February 20th, he posts on X that he has that he's met the threshold of the 28,000 signatures that he needs. On March 5th, Lieutenant Governor published it that she's designating Greg Bell as an independent advisor so that they're, to avoid any kind of conflict of interest. And what's kind of funny about that is she's utilized him really not at all on the issues that I'm going to talk about. On March 18th, the Davis County clerk verified that the 28,000 threshold was achieved by Governor Cox. And as you'll see here, the Davis County is in a contract with the governor's office to count the signatures or to verify the signatures of candidates in multi-county or statewide races. The day after he announced that, here's a copy of the contract. For some reason, the contract was signed on the 19th of March, which is odd. So I'm still kind of looking into figuring out why that happened. But basically, the lieutenant governor entered into a contract with the Davis County clerk to count the signatures or verify the signatures of those that were in multi-county races or statewide races. And as you see here, that the lieutenant governor would reimburse Davis County for all recruitment and personnel services in the amount of $40 per person recruited to perform the services of this agreement. Reimburse Davis County for all hourly wages worked by temporary employees hired to perform the services relevant in this agreement. So that, I think that's going to be pretty significant as we go through this, that the people that were verifying these signatures were temporary. So that looks like they might have contacted a temp agency and had these are the people that were verifying the signatures of Later on, you'll see that the Davis County Clerk says 32 candidates and I believe 310,000 signatures they verified. And according to this contract, it was all done by a temp agency. And we'll look at more of that later. But April 27th was the GOP convention here in Salt Lake City. Phil Lyman, who was one of the candidates, it says here that Cox received 32.5% of the vote and 67.5% by Representative Phil Lyman. So he ends up becoming the nominee for the Utah Republican Party here in the state of Utah. Next thing that happens, I think is significant for this, for what we're talking about, is on May 1st, it says the Lieutenant Governor's office published a primary election certification that contains the list of primary election candidates. I just pulled this off a calendar because I can't find a letter where she actually did that. This date is actually referenced a couple times in some documents related to the signature verification. So that's why I put it in here. And I just couldn't find the letter in time to put it on this presentation. May 23rd is a significant date because this is the time I got a letter from the Washington County. I had started doing grammar requests down in Washington County for a separate signature list. And this is May 23rd where they disclosed that a criminal investigation is going on in Washington County in reference to a signature list by Senator Ibsen. And you'll see more if you don't already know how that's connected to all of this. The next significant date for our purposes is June 10th. That was a day that Natalie Clausen, the running mate of Phil Lyman, contacted me about what I was doing in Washington County and what the results were of that grammar request with the Ibsen list. Also on this day, she submitted a grammar request for the Cox signature list. Then on the next significant date would be June 19th. A lot of things happen on June 19th. Number one, the Lieutenant Governor's office publishes a validation, a verification, they call it verification rate, and it's the validation rate of signatures of candidates that turned them in. And you see here on this column, it just states, how many total signatures were reviewed, how many were rejected, and then what the validity rate of those were. And then over here, it's a column that shows what the requirement was for that particular rate. Also on that day, in response to a grammar request, we received a breakdown of what the numbers were on the Cox signature list. So and because we got a copy of the list on that day, we knew that he ends up having a total of 33,475 signatures. And out of that, 592 were not even reviewed, is what they're telling us. And then they rejected 4,877, which left him 28,006 that they claimed at the time were verified signatures, valid verified signatures. Then that's what put him on the ballot, because you see here that he was only required to have 28,000. So once he met the threshold by 6, they stopped counting, they say, and he was on the ballot. So this is just an interesting view here of looking at his signatures. I divided them up like because we know what county they came from, but the majority of his signatures they were able to get out of Utah County, which is significant. And then Salt Lake City is next. Interestingly enough, only 6% of his signatures came out of Washington County, but Washington County ends up being an important part of this story or saga. So keep this in mind, that his unreviewed signatures, and they have an asterisk here where they say signature review stops once the required signature threshold is met. So there's 592, if you want to call it, in reserve. And we'll come back and talk about those as we proceed, as we go through this process. On June 21st, there was an article that at least it's a, I think this is important because Lyman calls for an outside group, preferably a CPA firm, to review the signatures of Gathering Ink collected for the Cox campaign. So, and you see down here that according to Lyman, he says unrealistically high number of valid signatures. So that's what he's saying on June 21st. He's making a public statement on that. Clearly, the Lyman campaign was already suspicious of these numbers. That's why they contacted me back on June 10th, earlier that month. So here you have Phil Lyman on June 21st calling for an audit, and the Davis County clerk says, as it relates to additional reviews, I'm not aware that there's anything in law that would allow that. So he's just saying no, that in his opinion, there's not going to be another review. So the interesting thing here is that he's giving out these numbers. I'm talking about the Davis County clerk. He says that there's 32,853 signatures collected for Cox, and then he talks about how many of those were thrown out. And what I found puzzling about that is he's like 30 signatures off. Remember, a few days before this article comes out, we got the numbers for Cox, and he has 4,877 that were rejected. But the county clerk who actually did so this top one comes from the governor's office that we received in response to grant requests. But here you have the county clerk saying that 4,847 were actually rejected, and the total number is also off by 30. So I don't know what the answer is to that. I just think it's a symptom of a bigger problem here. On June 21st, he issues a statement because of the questioning and the I would say pressure that Phil Lyman is bringing to bear. Kind of just says, hey, everything was done correctly. And here's where he says that the candidates were then certified by the lieutenant governor on May 1st, 2024. And again, I can't find any reference or any kind of document that shows that, but somehow he was aware of it, even though the public wasn't. And it's on that calendar, like I said, but he was aware that after these signatures were turned into the lieutenant governor's office, whatever the county, Davis County determined, that the lieutenant governor put her stamp of approval of it on May 1st. And then here he gives the stats of the, I would say, large number of signatures and candidates that they had to process. And again, here we, the thing I want to point out here is that in this article, the title, Governor candidate Phil Lyman calls for an audit, you have they interview Leatham, who is the CEO of Gathering Ink, which is the one that gathered the signatures. And he says, Cox has thousands of extra signatures that we've collected just to be safe, to make sure that he has more than he needs to qualify. And then the next sentence here is, McKinsey could not immediately confirm how many signatures in total were provided by Gather Inc. in the gubernatorial race, which is really odd because he's the clerk. First, he's off by 30 as to how many signatures he actually processed and that Cox had compared to what the governor's office is claiming that he has. Then he says he doesn't even know the total. Well, we know the total, because we can add and we can look at the rejected signatures and the unreviewed signatures, and we know the total. But here's my other problem, and I mentioned this already in a previous video. Unreviewed signatures is only 592. So how this Leatham guy is on June 21st is telling us that Cox has thousands of extra signatures, that's a lie. But again, this is part of the reason why I want to go over this outline or this timeline is because it demonstrates just how they were trying to be deceitful as time goes on. They want to lead us to believe from a public standpoint on June 21st that Lyman is just crazy and that everything is okay. And guess what? If it's not okay, Cox had thousands of extra signatures. That's a lie. He only had 592, according to the Lieutenant Governor's office. By that evening, let me just point out here, this article, and as you know, between Deseret News and KSL, they're the same news organization, but the title of it, the governor candidate Phil Lyman calls for audit into Governor Spencer Cox signatures. By that evening, the title on Deseret News changes to Washington County Attorney says no evidence of a candidate acting inappropriately in signature gathering. And again, if this goes back to the Ibsen list that I was looking for, the Senator Ibsen down in southern Utah, and I'll explain, if you don't already know, give you more context on why that fits into all this. Again, here you have Leatham saying if they could disqualify 5 of them, meaning 5 signatures from Cox's signatures, he says there are thousands of extra signatures. Again, that's a lie. But that's, I think they thought that we would believe that and just let it go. On July, the first week of July, I was notified that on July 2nd, the Attorney General investigators contacted people in Utah County, showed them a petition list similar to this, but it was filled out. It was for Governor Cox, and it had signatures on it. And the people that were contacted, they were victims of forgery. Their names and addresses and information was on the list, and it was forged, and it was obvious to them it was forged. This is why the investigators contacted them, and this is one of the issues that we're in court about, and I'll explain why as we move on. The interesting thing why this is significant here is because they get a business card and a case number, but they're told that their signatures are actually in the unreviewed signatures of this 592, and that it didn't really affect the outcome of Governor Cox's signatures. So my question has always been, why on July 2nd was if these signatures are unreviewed signatures, and they're telling us here signature review stops once a required signature threshold is met, then nobody should have been looking at these 592 signatures. So my theory is that as early as July 2nd, because that's when the investigation that we're aware of, this one, there's actually several. This is the one that I'm mentioning here. This is the earliest that I've been made aware that an investigation on forged signatures was occurring. My theory is that they knew that what Lyman was saying publicly, these guys knew that, and I mean the governor's office, the attorney general's office, I believe the Davis County clerk, they knew that the Cox signatures, that he was short. So they started looking at his unreviewed signatures, which really were not unreviewed, but for whatever reason, and I think in time within, we're going to find out the truth. But that's just something that I'm bringing up that we need to just bookmark for now. On July 3rd, the lieutenant governor puts a position statement regarding grandma requests for election returns, and there's other people looking for different issues on this election because they're questioning the integrity of the process, and she's telling the clerks, don't give them any information, and the grandma's not the way, and all this other stuff. And there's an article about it you can read about her efforts to try to, and she actually followed it by not fulfilling a number of grandma requests. July 3rd, the Salt Lake Tribune does an interesting story titled, I'm Not a Conspiracy Theorist. And it does this story about Phil Lyman, and it says, calls it the labyrinthine plan involves. And he kind of the reporter brings this up. I think Brian is not with the Tribune anymore, but at this time when he's writing the story, he tries to cloak it in this mystique that there's this labyrinth of just this complicated manner in which that this conspiracy theorist Phil Lyman has in his mind. But then he goes on, if you read the article, Inside Lyman's Theory, I think he does a pretty good job at explaining, when you take off the cloak that he tries to put on it, I think he does a pretty good job at explaining what is happening at this point in July. And he says here, in mid-May, former Salt Lake City School Board member Michael Clara, that's me, submitted an open records request using the GRAMA to access the signature gathering forms for Ibsen's reelection effort. Again, this is Senator Ibsen in southern Utah and St. George area. Ibsen failed to submit enough signatures, and he goes on, he says, according to documents provided to the Salt Lake Tribune, the Washington County clerk told Clara he would allow him to inspect the records in their office, including those marked as private. However, he could not remove them or make a copy. When Clara attempted to set up a time to view the records, the Washington County attorney stepped in to deny Clara access to the signature packets because signatures on political petitions are protected and not subject. But this is the main part. Ibsen submitted the signatures Ibsen submitted were part of an ongoing criminal investigation. The Washington County attorney says the investigation into the signatures submitted by Ibsen does not involve gathering. Okay, so what's significant about this is, and I'm glad that he points this out because this is lost in all this, is that the county clerk, in response to my GRAMA request, was actually going to let me see everything, and then everybody gets the memo that nope, we're not doing this. So and this is, as I already showed you the letter that I got on May 23rd or 24th. In this story, Brian does a good job and just says, Clara has appealed that denial at the State Records Committee. Will hear an appeal on July 18th. And then he says, because the Ibsen and Cox hired the same signature collecting company, Gathering, the Lyman campaign suggests there may also be irregularities with the Cox petition. And shortly before Election Day, Lyman's campaign submitted an open records request to obtain the petitions for Cox. As of Wednesday afternoon, Lyman's campaign has not yet appealed that denial. However, they have intervened in Clara's appeal and will be part of the hearing on July 18th. Lyman is urging his supporters to attend the hearing en masse as a show of support and force. Should they succeed in prying those signatures free, Lyman hopes they will show Cox qualified for the primary illegitimately, which they hope would disqualify the incumbent Republican. So he says that, if you followed any of his ex-posts, he's saying that tongue-in-cheek, with an air or tone of sarcasm and rolling his eyeballs while he's writing that. So on July 18th, people actually did show up en masse and responded to Phil Lyman's call to come to this meeting. And this is where we did the appeal. We end up before the State Records Committee trying to get a copy of the Ibsen signature list. Now, what Natalie Klein said in that hearing, and what I understood from the day I met her, that she called me, is they want this Ibsen list and they want to compare it. They want to get the names on the Ibsen list and compare it to the names that are on the Cox list from Washington County. Because what their theory is that Washington County clerks were more, intent or I guess that they had a higher bar, if you will, of certifying those signatures. And so the theory is by Natalie Clausen and Phil Lyman is that they're going to find signatures in Washington County that are rejected but were accepted on the Cox list. And if you don't know this, one of the things that that happens is when people are getting signatures, they often will have 2 or 3 lists at a time for people to sign, especially if it comes from the same company. And so in this case, we know of people that said that they actually signed for Governor Cox's list and Ibsen's list at the same time. And so that's why they want this list to compare it. And you recall that the reason I showed you that what it's a contract between Davis County and the Lieutenant Governor's office is because it appears that a lot of these people that were doing the signatures in Davis County were from a temp agency versus full-time deputy clerks in Washington County were doing the Ibsen list. So that may account for the discrepancy. And again, there's a theory that there's a discrepancy, and you can almost confirm that theory by the fact that these guys in Washington County are tenaciously holding on to that Ibsen list, and at all costs don't want to release it. And that's why we're going to court about it. On August 19th, almost a month later, and if you didn't already know, the State Records Committee ruled against us, ruled in favor of Washington County that they could withhold the Ibsen list until their investigation is done. But as I pointed out in, I think, update number 1, the investigation is actually done. It was done a month after the hearing, but they're still not releasing it. So that's why we're appealing it in court. On August 19th, in run around Lyman, Cox, Curtis, Brown call for Davis County clerk signature audit. Now, what's interesting about this is these guys end up on August 19th. The headline is on, I think this is ABC4 News, that these guys are asking for the legislative auditor. And I like here, but we trust our county clerks and are committed to addressing any issues found to enhance the process. So then this is one of those other bizarre periods where things just start, you can't keep up with them at the time. And it says, Lyman, however, has accused Cox of not getting the required signatures, and in July sued to inspect the unredacted signatures of everyone who appeared on Cox's list, which is a bit of a separate issue, but it's important that there's a number of signatures that are private and withheld. You can't even look at them. And that's what he's trying to access, which in the hearing in July, now they did a good job at pointing out that state law allows them as candidates to see that list, but it's being withheld by the incumbents right now. So on August 20th, Governor Cox and other GOP nominees called for audit of Davis County signature verification. And I like this thing here. I was kind of touching on it in the last one. We commend our county election officials for the work they do, especially the Davis County Clerk's Office, who counted and verified all signatures in statewide and multi-county races. We trust our county clerks and are committed to addressing any issues found to enhance the process. So it's kind of like, okay, I used to deal with this on the school board a lot, that we couldn't address things because it would hurt the feelings of the adults. And I would always say, so we're, at the expense of children, we don't want to hurt the adult feelings, so let's not talk about some of the issues we need to address. And that's kind of the same thing here. It's like, let's just do an audit. And Phil Lyman says, I don't believe Spencer Cox ever had the signatures to put him on the primary ballot. This is what he keeps saying. And Natalie Clausen says it too, this whole time period. Now the governor asked for the audit of signature gathering process. And so again, I like how these stories, in real time evolve and change. And then now, remember, this was the county clerk, Davis County clerk, who earlier, a couple of months ago, said, well, there's really no way to review. It's not in the law, when Phil Lyman was asking for it. But now you got Governor Cox and some of these other people asking for it. And my theory is they knew what the outcome was going to be, and they kind of orchestrated this. So that's why they're asking for it. And now you got the clerk doing a 180. I welcome this audit. I reaffirm that each signature was reviewed by trained election workers and either validated or rejected in accordance with the requirements set forth by Utah law. So on August, 21st, on August 20th is when I filed the appeal for the issue that happened on July 18th. You have to do it within 30 days. And so and I think I got the order on July 22nd. So the appeal for the Ibsen signature list is in 3rd District Court has been filed. And there's a case number if you're able to get on with in the court cases, you can follow it. And I'll give you a little more update on it as we go along. So on August 21st, remember that this call for a audit by the legislative auditors actually has now somehow fallen in the lap of the state auditor. Not the legislative auditors, but the state auditor is saying he's going to conduct a limited view of certain issues in the election process. And so on September 3rd, he issues a 9-page letter explaining that he's now reviewed the signatures, the signature verification process. And basically what he says here, and basically what he outlines here is that there was 28,006 signatures that Cox had submitted and that were verified, validated signatures, as it says here, by the Davis County clerks. And then the auditors from his office randomly picked 373 of them, and they determined that 4 of them, out of those that they reviewed, were probably not valid. And so he determines that if you take that number, there's a formula that he uses, that probably 300 of Cox's signatures out of this 28,006 that are validated, that probably 300 of them are not really valid. So that means that the Cox in February, where Cox says, "Hey, I got 28,000 and more that are valid that I've turned in," the state auditor is saying, statistically speaking, probably not 300 or not. So that means that Cox only has 27,706 that are valid. So let's just do a full stop here. This is what that crazy Lyman has been talking about since June 1st. He says that Phil Lyman calls for an audit because unrealistically high number of valid signatures. And so he was right. And the Salt Lake Tribune on July 3rd mocks him for saying this. And then, we go to this hearing and Natalie Clausen and all these people that are there listening, supporting them, believe the same thing, that there is no, that he didn't have the right amount of valid signatures. And now we have today on September 3rd, earlier this month, the state auditor says it. But this gets little attention because of the way the media covers this and the way they frame this. It's like, it's not a big deal. But again, I think that, in my opinion, Lyman and Clausen did not get the attention they deserved, or the recognition, if you will, that they were right. Here you have even in this jumbled, fumbly way that these guys got this audit to be done by the state auditor, it confirms what these guys, what Lyman and Clausen have been saying for the last few months. But there's more. The state auditor says in his report, statistically, it is possible that each candidate might have fallen short of the statutory requirement in the validated population of signatures based on our projected number of possible exceptions. Keep this in mind. These are projected numbers of possible exceptions is what he's saying. He says Cox had submitted and I'm saying that because watch how they treat these other spare numbers, if you will, or unreviewed numbers. Cox had submitted a smaller number of additional uncounted signatures such that we determined additional test work was needed. Therefore, we asked the validators to examine uncounted signatures submitted for Cox. And remember, these, what he's calling uncounted, and that other box or that other formula was unreviewed. So these are they're the same thing. Uncounted or unreviewed is the same thing. And what he says is that after the validators, and what he's referring to is the Davis County clerks, he had them go look at the numbers. And what he says in his report, that they determined that there were approximately 391 additional ballot signatures for Cox that were not included in the primary sample. So what he doesn't tell us, though, is that what we found out through grammar requests back in June, that Cox has these unreviewed signatures, 592. So apparently what happens is when the Davis County clerks, these are not the temp workers, these are the clerks themselves, go and look, they figure out that of the 592 unreviewed or uncounted signatures, that only 391 of them are valid. That's significant, because what that means is that if statistically speaking, now let me make this point, that 592, they did not come to a statistical conclusion that 391 were valid. They actually looked at every single signature of 592 and determined that 391 were valid, to the point that when the state auditor clerks went and checked their work, they came up with the same number. So what that means is that if you take 300 of those and apply them to the shortfall that statistically the auditor is saying that Cox has come up with, then that only leaves Cox 91. And I pointed this out yesterday on X, and people that are supporting Cox said, "Oh, great, then he still has enough." But I just want to go back and point out the lies that we were subjected to back in June. That in that article on June 21st, I believe it was, Cox has thousands of extra signatures that we've collected just to be safe, to make sure that he has more than he needs to qualify. And then at the time, McKinsey could not immediately confirm how many signatures in total were provided. Okay, so again, that was a lie. He doesn't have thousands as of today. From a statistical standpoint, he's 300 short, and from a realistic standpoint, he, if you take these, he only has 91 now. So, but let me make this point again. What this patriotic John says, Phil got the county clerks to admit Cox qualified on statistical likelihood of valid signatures, not 100% valid signatures. So, let's, and what he means is that if these spares or these unreviewed, those were not statistical. They looked at the 592, and they actually came up with, they looked at every single signature and determined that only 391 were valid. Now, what's interesting about that is the first batch of signatures that they took, that they claim were 85% or the same, come from the same ones of the 592, meaning that they count. When they get to 28,006, then they stop counting. The problem that they have now is, how does the first batch that they looked at come up with 85% validation rate? But this second batch, which are from the same ones, they just didn't count them, are 66% validity rate. So it calls into question these validation rates that they have proposed for all these other signatures. But let's look at these Cox ones. So I'm gonna just as an exercise here, go back to what the patriotic John is saying about the difference between statistical numbers and real numbers. Let's take this validation rate of 66% because we get this from real numbers, meaning that they looked at every single 592 signatures and came up with that 391 were valid. So let's go with this 66% validation rate and apply it to these other to the first batch that were counted. So instead of having an 85.2% validity rate, let's give Cox a 66% validity rate on his first batch of numbers, and this is what we come up with. We know that he turns in a total of 33,475 signatures. And if you apply a 66% validity rate to that, that means that 11,381 are rejected. And that means that only 22,094 are valid, which makes him short. He doesn't have any spares anymore because we gave them all to him. And that means that of all the signatures he turned in, the 33,475 with a 66% validity rate that we're pretty sure is accurate because they counted all those 592 individually, he only ends up having 22,094 signatures. Going back again to this, what Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen were saying. And in my opinion, they're vindicated. And that all this hucksters and shell game that Washington County and the Lieutenant Governor's office is doing, this is what they're hiding. They know that Cox does not have the signatures. And they never counted on the fact that people like Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen would just be determined to uncover this. And then in the process, they convert people like me. Because when I first heard about this, I thought they were conspiracy theorists. I said, I'll just help with grammar requests just to help these poor people find out that, so they don't lose their minds. And then here I am, fully converted to what they're saying and even defending them. I'm not on the Lyman campaign. I did vote for him as a delegate, but I am fully committed to his cause of rooting out this corruption. That's just, and here it is right here. It's undeniable. So let me just point out some other interesting facts here that when you go back to the Cox signature list and you see that these black numbers on the outer ring are the percentage of where they come out of what counties, how many, and then I superimpose the ones that we know are not matching. So in Utah County, we know there's an investigation, but we also, and that makes sense because 31% of the signatures there don't match, meaning that the signatures don't match what's on file, and they were actually rejected. Here you have Washington County only has 6% of the total signatures, but 26% of those are not matching. So that tells us that somebody better start looking into Salt Lake County, and because that has a high number of not matching, and they're probably if you got Washington County that we know is under investigation. We know Utah County is, but they're denying it. That's what part of the issues are that were in court. So in the Ibsen case, going back to the Ibsen case that I filed back in August 20th, on September 9th, I got a motion to dismiss from the Washington County and a motion to dismiss from the State Records Committee. So I filed a response to that to try to keep that in play. And on this one, I just got word that I believe the Lyman campaign is looking into joining this particular case in court, which will be helpful because I'm doing it pro se right now, and I'm going to get tripped up if these guys keep sending motions to dismiss, because I'm not an attorney. And my initial thought was, well, this is a simple case, they're just lying and stuff. But as they get technical about it, things could go sideways. So I'm grateful that the Lyman campaign is looking into maybe joining this. And if they do, they're not going to do it pro se. I assume they would have an attorney. So that'll be helpful. So that's where that's at now. The other case that I filed has to do with the Washington County or the Utah County, where we know that the Attorney General's office is investigating forged signatures on the Cox list, but they deny it. And they denied it through the GRAMA process, where I point this out in a previous update, or the initial video, I think, on this series, is that they deny the record request, that you have Daniel Burton lying about it, and then the Records Committee secretary and the chair actually reject it, don't even let it go to an appeal to the State Records Committee. So that's what the issue is in court, is just asking the judge, and this is just showing that these guys are documented liars already in the courts in terms of GRAMA requests. So that's what I filed on September 9th, that appeal. So what I'm appealing there is the fact that the Records Committee rejected, not the committee, the secretary and the chair, they can do it by rule, is just say we're not even going to accept it or let this go before the Records Committee, because we don't think you even have evidence that the AG's office is actually doing an investigation. So all I'm doing is asking the judge to review the evidence that I do have and remand it back to the State Records Committee and compel them to have a hearing on this. So that one I hope is pretty simple, and that'll get resolved pretty quickly. And then let's see, on September 11th, I did the response to the I had to do another response to the motion to dismiss. So you're updated. I kind of took a detour, sorry about that, to give you some context of some other developments that were going on, but that's where we're at on these two cases. And thank you for those of you that donated to cover the filing fees and the cost to just get this into court. Thank you.